So, Corey, my gosh, we've just finished 2024, and compared to the few years before that, it's certainly been a roller coaster ride, especially for trailers. It's kind of interesting because what we're seeing here at ACT Research is, the economy in general has been good. And by the end of the year, the freight had started to improve. It was a slow pace, but there was some improvement being seen. And on the new equipment side, equipment was being purchased. We know that from what was happening on the Class 8 side and the medium duty side of things, so basically the power unit side. But for trailers, not so much. We saw demand soft, and we saw a lot of people sort of with a wait and see attitude. What did you see from your perspective? How is 10 playing into what happened in 2024?
Kind of just to take a step back. So for us, 2024 and really the end of 2023 were a transformational year for the enterprise itself. At the end of 2023, we essentially put three large regional and national trailer lessors together via a combination, which ultimately formed Transportation Equipment Network. And we fully, finished our rebranding towards the end of 2023 and early 2024. Following that, we also combined another similar business named TIP Canada up in the Canadian market. So within about 6 to 8 months, four large trailer lessors, 15,000 pieces of equipment each came together. And as a result of that, we're now one of the largest equipment lessors in North America. We're the number one largest full service lessor in North America. So for us, we've seen a lot of growth on the inorganic side. And we've also experienced, specific to the temperature controlled space, about a 20% fleet growth expansion in the US as a standalone. On the dry van side, for us, it was pretty stable after we combined all the businesses together from a fleet perspective. So kind of from our point of view, 2024 on the trailer industry as a whole, Jennifer, was fairly stable. No major ebbs and flows one way or another, not major growth, not major downturn. And a lot of our customers kind of took the approach of, they've ramped up through COVID very heavily, and it was more of a wait and see and, ride the cycle and continue with the equipment that they have. So all in all, it was a good year for us, a transformational year. And from an industry perspective, fairly stable in that respect as well.
I appreciate you saying, stable, but yet a fairly good year, because when people aren't buying new equipment, in this case, we're talking about new trailers, then one of the options to keep income flowing would be to rent or lease, depending on whether they want some equipment for a short term or a long term. Can you kind of just explain or elaborate a little bit more on about what I just said with the difference in new purchases being not as robust, and yet you're seeing a good year from the rental lease side?
Sure. So typically, it's no secret. Fleets will dabble more with shorter term pieces of equipment and as more of an interim, as well as, with some level of uncertainty going on in the industry, it gives them more flexibility to turn in pieces of equipment, if they have a downturn in their business. So that naturally kind of ticked up for us through 2024. We saw a lot more in fleet movement than new purchase of equipment, particularly more along the lines of the dry van side of our business, Jennifer. Again, on the refrigerated side, it's a little bit more or less, well, it's less cyclical. And obviously, no secret to what ACT puts out. Lead times in refrigerated pieces of equipment still continues to be a little bit further than, historically they were, especially when you get into more multi-temps and specialized pieces of equipment. So in that respect, we still did have a pretty good uptick in new purchases for refrigerated equipment last year. And again, the figure was we had over 20% organic growth in the fleet size in our 10 Cool business division, which is our temperature controlled area of our business in the US as a standalone. So we did see strength in that market. But the dry van side, again, was very stable, and more leasing and renting as through our in-fleet was definitely kind of an observation that we've had in the business as well.
So one of the things that we heard from OEMs and suppliers and others on the front line of the trailer industry were that there were pivot points they were watching, and these were some things that needed to happen in order for new trailer purchases to pick up, for the demand to pick up. Some of that was they were watching what was happening in the freight markets, freight demand and rates, both spot and contract. What was happening, what was going to happen with interest rates, because there is a cost of capital, and when there's inflation and higher interest rates, it makes borrowing, if someone would need to do that to purchase equipment, more expensive. As well as, let's see, consumer confidence and how the consumers were feeling about things. In addition, getting beyond the election was mentioned. Another one that we heard, and this is one I wanted you to kind of share a little bit about from your perspective, rising maintenance costs, because that impacts whether someone decides to fix, repair, replace, extend their normal replacement cycle, particularly against what I've said with the freight and the backdrop of limited capital. So what are you seeing and what are you hearing from the maintenance side? How does that impact your business and your customers and some of the decisions they make?
Yes, it's a great question. So one of the questions we deal with almost daily here in our business. But typically in a market of uncertainty, Jennifer, and especially when you see rising costs, whether it's attributable to interest rates, inflation, lack of skilled labor in this industry, we usually see a trend more towards full service leasing in our business. The reason why, and again, I don't think it's any secret, but the full service lease package that we offer really just helps give visibility and certainty throughout that life of the lease. It kind of removes the ebbs and flows of maintenance expense. It's covered, it's not. We give you basically a fixed cost and a variable cost as around to what the maintenance is going to be. And it's our responsibility to make sure that all of our service providers, whether it's through TEN's maintenance division, or through third-party relationships that we have across the country, we are responsible for mitigating that cost on behalf of our customers. So again, it really unlocks much better visibility to the company that's actually leasing that piece of equipment. They don't have to deal with different labor rates all throughout the country or different markets, whether it's a different asset type, operation time. That really falls on us. And in an environment like this, we typically see the full service lease model outperform, whether it's a net lease where the customer is responsible for the maintenance or just an outright purchase as well.
I'd say what I really appreciate you saying that, because we actually did see softer demand in the dry van market versus the refrigerated market. I think the dry van market was down 29% year over year by the end of 2024, whereas the reefer market, while down, was only down about 13% year over year. And I appreciate and you're validating what we were hearing from OEMs and suppliers. While we don't track the difference between single temp and multi-temp and the variety of other special specifications that you might have in a refrigerated unit, that is one of the things that we're hearing, that if you wanted a single temp, that was pretty easy to get. But if you wanted a multi-temp, which is what most people who were purchasing did want, the lead time was significantly longer and not quite as bad as, or quite as long, you might say, as the queues during the pandemic. If you wanted a multi-temp last year, you needed to get in queue and stay in queue in order to get that equipment.
Thanks, Jennifer. It's good to get reinforcement around that and know we aren't the only ones experiencing it. And it's also interesting too. So not only did we see some lingering delays, specifically around the specialized and multi-temp pieces of equipment, but we've also observed, and this is kind of something that's still remaining as a bottleneck within the ultimate production cycle, where even though a trailer does finish through the factory and go through production and get completed, we still sometimes have to move those trailers, again, more relevant on the multi-temp and specialized pieces of equipment, to a third-party upfitter that will do a lift gate install, will do, side door work, anything with regard to electrical and other things like that. And that continues to compound the time as well, because these upfitters still are, very behind, especially now when more fleets are turning to multi-temps and specialized pieces of equipment as well. So
interestingly enough, Corey, that's happening. I know we're talking trailers, but that's also been happening in the medium duty space with medium duty trucks that are being built, but they have to go to an upfitter to get whatever specialty body is going to go on that before they can be delivered to the customer.
yeah, so that's another challenge that we're dealing with over here too. I don't necessarily believe that we're going to get much relief in that respect through the first half of this year, but I'm curious to know if ACT has any foresight into that we can use going forward.
I like how you said first half, because that's the same thing we hear kind of across the board. And at this point, there are, I think, a lot of hopes pinned on the second half of the year, and to see how things unfold in the first half, what happens in the freight market, what happens in the economy. We'll probably talk about it here in a minute, but what happens with tariffs, and not just what's happening, yesterday and today, but where it actually settles out. But right now, it's sort of a lather, rinse, repeat for 2025. We're expecting the same thing for the trailer market. We're expecting the soft demand to continue. A lot of high hopes, as you said, as we look into the second half of the year and see how we set up then for the beginning of 2026.
And by the way, I've learned to hedge very well with what I say with regard to projections and predictions, because it changes almost daily these days. But
isn't that the truth?
yes.
So, Corey, in that regard, one of the things that we talked about it a little bit earlier, a pivot point was post-election. Let's get past the U.S. election, see who wins, see what their agenda is, what they're going to do, and how quickly or not quickly they're going to do it. And post-U.S. election, what we've been hearing is increased quoting activity, some uptick in the last quarter of 2024 in order activity. Were you seeing anything like that from your standpoint, from your customers?
Yeah, I wish you'd asked me this question last week before we got news of the tariffs, but we've certainly been seeing an uptick in quotes or requests for quotes. We haven't seen, major upticks in signed orders as of yet. So we haven't ultimately submitted our orders to our OEM partners at this point. But activity has been strong, certainly through the beginning of this year, again, with regard to requests for quotes. We're kind of seeing that across the board as well. So, more continuing strength on the refrigerated side of our business. Again, same story, particularly on specialized side, more of our food service and food distribution customer profiles, pharmaceutical. We're also seeing that with what we classify, Jennifer, as integrated logistics providers. So it's essentially a logistics provider that is servicing another end user. So it could be a grocery store where we essentially provide the trailers to that customer. We're seeing strong, indications in that market still. We are kind of still seeing somewhat of weakness in truckload and 3PL areas of the business. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But overall, I think to start the year, getting past the election, which was still a major uncertainty for a lot of our customers and our fleet operators, is definitely a big hurdle that's been cleared. It's just obviously now kind of navigating all the changes in the environment, particularly around tariffs, some green regulations that may be changing, which I don't want to go there just yet. So please don't ask me about it because we don't have the answer. So we'll be monitoring all this very closely and seeing how it progresses and shakes out over the next couple of weeks and months.
All right. So I want to circle back to something that kind of touched on earlier, but it's a big hot button topic right now, and that's tariffs, U.S. tariffs between Canada and Mexico, as well as China, and then the potential for retaliatory tariffs or other measures from those countries towards the U.S. Here at ACT, potential tariffs are potential until they're real, and right now there's still a lot of negotiation happening. President Trump has said there will be tariffs, and there have been subsequent conversations with the leaders of both Canada and Mexico. That's a very fluid situation, so we don't adjust our forecasts until we have some concrete information. We certainly run scenarios. If this happens, then this is what our forecast might look like. But when we publish forecast, it's based on the information that we do know. What are you seeing or hearing, and how does this very fluid situation about tariffs impact you? You mentioned earlier about the expansion and working more in the Canadian market. What's happening from your perspective, and how do you handle this situation?
So I think the only way to answer this question right now, Jennifer, just because it's so fresh, on Saturday we obviously got news that the Trump administration was going to be imposing tariffs on Mexico, Canada, and smaller tariffs on the Chinese market. And as of today, this morning, the tariffs were supposed to go into effect for Mexico and Canada. A couple hours later, Mexico and the United States mentioned that they were going to be pushing the tariffs off by 1 month. So, again, this is all very fluent. It's changing very fast. I think from our perspective right now, what we are doing to be ahead of it is working with our OEM partners as closely as we can. Ultimately, we're turning to them actually to ask for an analysis on exactly what you said. If this happens, then what does that really, mean for us as a purchaser of equipment? So that's something that we're going to be leaning on our OEMs, working very closely and partnering with them on. So ultimately we can deliver that messaging consistently to our customers. But your guess is as good as mine at this point right now. And, depending on what happens ultimately with Canada, because we have a large presence now in that market, we could see some effects up there as well, maybe from a currency perspective, cross-border perspective of some of our customers that have operations here in the US and in Canada and vice versa. So again, something we're going to be monitoring very closely. It will play a factor into what we look at for this year. And our OEMs are certainly going to be, very closely in tune with that as well. But from a sentiment perspective, I don't think anything's really changed just yet from our customer side. I wouldn't be surprised if this leads to a lot more conversations and questions and inbound requests to us for guidance to our customers, which we're always there for in that respect.
But in the meantime, you said something that was really important. You said it's a factor. Tariffs are a factor, one of many. And we talked about the pivot points in addition to some of those, the interest rates and inflation and all of those things. We also have natural disasters. We have, hurricanes. We have the fires out in California. And those are other things that impact markets, impact whether people have trailers, still have trailers, need to purchase trailers, need to rent or lease equipment in the interim until they can work out with their insurance companies and other people, as part of that whole process. So tariffs are important, and certainly that's a big discussion. What are you hearing from those other factors?
Our business now, because we're a nationally based company and we now have operations obviously in Canada, all of our customers feel the brunt of natural disasters and these unmitigated, unplanned type of events that occur. And what we try to do is we actually try to get out ahead of it as best as we can, even though obviously you can't predict when one of these things are going to happen. But We try to have equipment available year round at all of our yard facilities that are up and ready to go. So if we do get a call, we can service our customers expeditiously. That's been a major initiative, Jennifer, here in our business level right now, is doing so. And we've also taken a look at particularly hot markets where we've seen, an uptick in potential natural disasters such as Florida, California, and these yards of ours, we're strategically, putting a large focus on making sure that we have equipment ready to go in the event that one of these events does occur. The other thing is just to kind of circle back to the tariff piece. An expectation of mine, and it'll be interesting to see if this actually comes to fruition. If the tariffs do become, kind of a topic here that is here to stay, we may actually see an uptick in further leasing activity as well, because that gives our fleet customers and potential customers, longer periods of time to kind of smooth out that uptick in cost that they would see via a tariff for the purchase price of that trailer up front. So that would be something interesting to see, whether or not that makes any difference. And if ultimately, we see some longer terms on equipment as well, starting to come through the funnel when we're quoting out deals for customers as well.
I appreciate that, Corey. It sounds like you're doing there what we're hearing from other folks in the industry. We're hearing about increased fleet diversification and fleet efficiencies, real hard looks and deep assessments of what they've been doing, what they want to accomplish, and how they may need to adjust to reach those goals. And it sounds like you're doing that same thing there, not just for your company, but working with your customers to help meet their goals as they do some reassessments of what they own versus what they rent, what they lease, and how they've got that spread out to meet their customers' needs. And in the end, I guess, get all of us the stuff we want when we want it, right?
Yeah. And I think, bigger is better in this environment, I'll say. It gives us a lot more flexibility, Jennifer. So if we're dealing with a customer that may have, like you mentioned, a diversified fleet, right? Some of it may be owned, some of it may be leased, some of it may be rented. We can actually offer solutions where we may actually look to buy their existing fleet, lease it back to them, and replace those pieces of equipment with newer or new assets at a later point. So, what that does is it obviously frees up more capital for our customer at the end of the day, and they can use that capital in more core areas of their business if they need it. So it's about, kind of being flexible, being creative in these types of environments. And I think we perform fairly well in that respect when, the industry is going through a lot of challenges and changes. And I don't know if that's something that, from ACT's point of view, you guys kind of see trends around as well, in markets of uncertainty in these times. Do you see like a dip in trailer purchases as well that can be correlated back to, if there's events like tariffs, natural disasters, things like that, where it's very unpredictable within the business cycle?
So what I would say is anytime there's change, whether it's the tariffs or the weather, you start out with some uncertainty. And as part of the process, there is innovation. There's assessments of what we had, what we have, and what we want it to look like going forward. So there's always some change. As you know, this is a very cyclical business, so that always factors into it. And while there may not be a weather event at the same place year after year, there's a weather event someplace. There's some geopolitical activity somewhere, be it tariffs or other types of wars and conflicts that have impact here in the U.S. as well as in those other countries, because it is a global economy. So there is some impact, but in the end, there's also a return to the mean. It doesn't stay elevated. It doesn't stay in the trough permanently. So we do see that, and and that continues. We can see that from history. That's something that we'll also continue to see going forward. The degrees might vary, of course, depending on what the world looks like. And I think you said it well earlier, we don't know yet. So we just continue to watch some of these things.
I think the saying is, in life, there's only one thing that's constant, and it's called change.
It's change. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anyway, Corey, I really appreciate your insights. You're verifying some of the things that we're hearing from other folks. It's always nice to get that second opinion or that feedback that's consistent. Mixed signals are a lot more difficult to interpret and figure out what they really mean. And so when we have consistent signaling in both the data and the anecdotes that we're receiving from the commentary from folks like you in the industry, that's really, really important. I'm not only do I appreciate your time today, but I'm really looking forward to the next many months that we get a chance to speak, because we're going to be doing this monthly, right? We're going to sit down and we're going to talk about what's going on in the trailer industry, and as things develop with tariffs, as things develop in the industry, who knows what's going to happen with demand and the supply chains, and we know some things. We know there are going to be other things that we're not anticipating, and looking forward to discussing all of that with you and what the impact is, not just from the news side and the data that we're seeing, but what's happening from the front lines, from the rental lease business, and with the fleets that you're doing business with.
Absolutely. I think we're going to have our hands full, certainly on a monthly basis. I'm sure we could talk every day, Jennifer, and have enough to say these days, but really looking forward to this. This is a great partnership with ACT. We follow your guys, industry research and then analytics almost daily, and it helps drive our business as well. So exciting partnership with you guys, and really looking forward to being a speaker at the upcoming Market Vitals event and doing the next session with you guys in person as well.